Hello and welcome to the Business and Banking Dialogue Show, your daily one-stop show for the best in topics of financial world and subject matter experts. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. We are live across EPS channels, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. If you have missed any of our earlier discussions, you can log on to www.electronicpay.in and you'll find the choice of your dialogue show, and you can have a look at them once again. You may also look at YouTube and send us your likes for any of the shows that you've already done so far. Once again, thank you for participating in today's show. I'm KK, your host and moderator for today's show. Our topic for the next 1 hour is accelerating transformation using PaaS. PaaS is payments as a service. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are discussing PaaS, payments as a service. You must have heard about SaaS, software as a service. So, similarly, you have PaaS, payments as a service. Infrastructure as a service is another one that you must have heard about. These are ubiquitous models, and we as customers just use them without having to know who, how, and their interconnections between various entities. So, ladies and gentlemen, just to give you a brief background, in March of 2000, PayPal was formed and became a prominent, rather predominant electronic wallet in the US. Similarly, regional services like WebMoney, Yandex.Money in Russia, Alipay in China, we heard about it from many other participants. While popular in their own countries, these do not have significant global reach. PayPal became regional electronic wallet provider, providing greater liquidity, but still do not provide for the free flow of funds between all popular electronic wallet solutions. PaaS is designed to allow merchants and other market participants to utilize local, regional, and global payments options through a single interface. The complexity of moving funds between providers is handled by PaaS layer and is hidden from the user. Because only one interface is required, merchants or users are only required to maintain one financial repository. So this is an interesting concept. And to discuss on accelerating payments using PaaS, we have with us today Mr. Mahesh Ramamoorthy. He has been our guest in our earlier shows. You must have heard about him and his interesting talks on various topics he had. Mahesh is a regional managing director, APME, that is Asia Pacific, Middle East, and Africa, banking solutions for FIS. Right in front of you, if you see, you have his profile is right out there, and he's the kind of the, if you see his point number 4, he has had led delivery of large and complex programs across the region, and more recently has been key in setting up the payment as a service, which is our topic of discussion today. And that's what we want to talk to him today. So good afternoon, Mahesh, and please, my participants, welcome me in joining Mahesh to the show. Mahesh, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, sir. How are you? And good afternoon to everyone.
Yes, well, all good out here, so far so good. So let's look at the look at PaaS, Mahesh, and to give a perspective to our participants, let's look at the evolution of PaaS. And has PaaS lived up to its reputation? And has PaaS, the public PaaS that people were talking about, which is good for the citizens, has that lived also to its reputation?
I would say that it's a good start point for our discussion.
Yeah.
I was saying when you look at payments, one has to be anyone who does a payment, right? As a customer or an end user, one has to always be assured about the security. One has to be assured about the non-repudiation part of the story in terms of the fact that if there is anything that happens to that transaction, it is traceable. And more importantly, the risk associated with managing the risk associated with that transaction. So I think today, if you look at it outside of the ease of the transaction, that adoption of ensuring that we give the comfort to the end customer and the end user is slowly moving there. I wouldn't call it is already there, because a lot of what we see is still traditional in nature. So in my view, the adoption of PaaS in country like India has evolved on a slower pace than where it should have been, and primarily driven by the fact that there have been I'm saying slow and steady only from a support perspective to the organizations who would like to leapfrog there, whether it is from a regulatory framework perspective, whether it is from a compliance perspective, whether it is even from a service provider perspective, who essentially jumps into this fray as to how does that assurance layer comes in. So to me, I think right now, I would say we are just at the tip of the iceberg. We probably are at about 5 or 6% adoption. But over the next, I would say next 4 to 5 years, it should ramp up straight into a 60% adoption, because that's very important, because a commodity service needs to be running in there and give that level of comfort to create adoption.
Wow, that's a significant jump that you're talking about in the next 2, 3 years. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's a lot for us to expect out there. So, Mahesh, this I know any pandemic they say changes things. So,
I'm
how is
losing you.
COVID?
Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Mahesh, can you
Now,
hear?
yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Sorry. So, any pandemic kind of gives you an opportunity and also disrupts a lot of things. Has COVID-19 kind of distorted the payments economics? Mahesh, can you hear me?
I think it's my issue which has come up.
Okay, we can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think it's probably could be my network which is getting disrupted, but I'm back online.
Okay. So my question to you was,
Are you able
Mahesh,
to hear me now?
yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, very well.
Yeah.
So the question was, how has
Yeah. Go
COVID-19
ahead.
changed payments landscape? How has COVID-19 changed the payments landscape, and how will it distort the payment economics? Mahesh?
My apologies. I think my network. I'm just trying to. It's okay. I think I'm back again.
Yeah, you're
I
there.
reconnected to another network.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, okay, let me ask you the question again, Mahesh. How COVID-19 is changing the payments landscape, and how will it distort the payments economics in India?
I think what's going to happen here is we're going to see a huge adoption and acceleration and move to digital payments, right? And we have already seen that journey coming up, whether it is frictionless, whether it is wearables, so non-touch, and then moving away. The government also trying to put a huge thrust in terms of supporting digital payments across various segments within the society, as well as in terms of the manufacture other segments of industry. Now, when that kind of a push comes in, what's going to happen is there are going to be a set of businesses and business services that are going to be in the front end, who are going to be very, very focused around creating innovations in the front end, whether it is the user experience or in terms of the frictionless behavior of what they should deliver it. So there's going to be lots and lots of opportunities emerging there. However, when you look at how you're going to complete a transaction, or how you're going to service that transaction, whether it is going to be an aggregation of card-based transaction or with non-card-based direct-to-account capabilities, or you want to pay through any mode of transaction, any mode capabilities that you have from us, from your current available in back-end payment mechanisms, banks and entities will begin to be forced to see what are the options available. A, which allow them to integrate quickly from all these front-end service layers. They're going to be able to say who's going to be able to ramp up the sudden need that's going to come in from a scale perspective. And more importantly, who's going to give them a very secure availability from a transaction processing capability. And would say that land one, use one, and use it across a lot of the business services. So that's what is going to happen very soon. When that happens, creating monolithic infrastructures by entities are going to be starting to get broken down. And when you start to create that kind of a, when you get into that kind of a pull from the front end players, you're going to see that entities, I would say, whether it's financial institutions and institutions who want to access payments for completion, are going to look to see who are the players, who are the players who are going to give me that value, who are the players who are going to be make it available at a very short notice and a very agile fashion. When that kind of a shift happens, that's what I would call a dramatic tectonic shift that one is going to see. You're going to see that all moving very fast, whether it is on the merchant side, whether it's on the consumer side, whether it is online, or whether it's physical card, or whether it's friction. The end experience could be very different. Initiation could be very different, but completion will see agility required, and into one channel, multiple processing capabilities. That's the way I see it. So it's going to see adoption is going to change. Adoption is going to be rapid, and anyone who's going to be trying to create it, repeated without creating the one to many, is not going to fly. It's not going to help them.
Okay, yeah, we'll see how this shapes up in the days to come. Mahesh, can you touch upon different payment operating models, and why does a structural shift towards payment as a service model seems like almost unavoidable?
Well, see, it has today. What happens, KK sir? If you step back and look at it, and I alluded to it in my previous update, when you look at an entity who is providing services and payment services, a banking entity or a financial entity, he or she will need to constantly invest and continue to upgrade, continue to keep currency in terms of current to the entire environment, as well as create the security layer. A lot of areas are required. Now, trying to invest and keep yourself updated is a challenge. So I think what is going to happen, whether it is a financial services player, they're going to end up saying what is core to them. Yeah. Their core is about creating their business and expanding their business. They're going to be saying who are the partners who are going to be with us to be able to enable us create the transition to agility, and who are going to make sure we fulfill our business propositions. So then that kind of approach is what is going to change. And that's what is going to drive the market going forward. When those scenarios start to emerge, you're going to see players saying, who can offer me that? So which partner can offer me these from a payments perspective? Okay, is it a menu-based service? Is it a usage-based payment that I'm making? So if I earn 10 bips, if I earn 60 bips, can I give 10 bips and be done with it? And then I get everything surrounded. As long as I'm able to get the access to the data for their data, that's fine. So I would say that the commodity services which start to define two services which essentially enable using the front-end business services API kind of a layer. I think those kind of shifts are going to drive people towards moving away from their creating of monolithics to creating and moving into a PaaS. I think that's going to be a very, very big shift, and that's going to happen pretty rapid as becomes I would say it started to see. We already have started to see. People also will start to see cost saves. I mean, as one comes out of it, one will say, okay, where do I reduce some of the overhead costs? Continual change into their own systems are going to create that much of overhead. Can I just offload this and be done with it? as long as I have my, I would say, boundaries to make it happen. So to me, I think these are absolute essentials that will emerge. It will become mandatory rather than being a good to have situations. When that shift gets recognized, the earlier you recognize it, the faster you can be a part of the bandwagon.
So Mahesh, just for people to kind of get that thoughts together on this, for those who are new to this, new to payment as a service. So it seems to be an attractive proposition for businesses for whom executing payment is perhaps not a core operation. Uh, can you explain the use case of payment as a service in sectors such as maybe retail and e-commerce or travel and hospitality? How 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 does it fit in? I mean, how does this whole thing work? And it is a good proposition for the users.
So I'll take a use case that is now gaining a lot of steam. Right? Let's take a case in point of the MSME sectors. Let's take a
Yes.
case in point of, I would say, agricultural sector. These sectors today, I'll just shift a bit from what you asked because it makes a lot of relevance to that sector. Now,
Okay.
if you look at those sectors today, given the kind of challenges that are emerging, given the kind of back-end automation that's coming in it as you go higher in the value chain, the last mile are dependent on cash to complete a lot of their transactions. That's not going to, whereas if you genuinely ask, everyone has an account. It is about the enablement and the acceptance that is going to wean them away from the cash. The digital acceptance is what is going to wean them away from there. To me, I think if you look at when 60% of our entire industry is pushed towards from the MSME sector, and if you're starting to look at that market, it's in it's in $1 billion business. It is $1 billion future opportunity that is going to emerge, and being able to tap into the right business use cases there. So one goes into purchases. Now, you look at the uh, a dairy sector when there is a farm, when there is a person who's at the end, I would say milkman, who essentially takes it from the cow, the buffalo, takes it into the nearest, I would say, aggregation point, and then from there he goes on to the next level. Now, every time when there is a cash or there a credit approach, it's not going to help. Rather, if you have a digital payment, it immediately comes into his account for whatever is getting measured. He has, he or she has the ability to say, you know what, I got money in my account, which means my money is with me, and then I'm able to spend it in terms of the way I want to, he or she wants to spend it as a part of the whole flow of next his chain to get to procure his goods and to make it raw materials and everything that are required. The same happens when you look at any of the handicrafts and all of those societies that are there in the MSME space. So you're going to see a lot of people starting to move into those sectors. You're going to see a lot more of use cases emerging from those sectors which start to fulfill the endpoint turning from cash to digital. And there could be about 5 or at least 10 or 15 that one can rattle off. But when you look to automate and bring those into into the digital space, you will see the acceptance moving. And the moment you see that acceptance moving, you see that there is a sudden explosion in the way the digital transactions are starting to change. When you get that kind, any individual entity cannot manage it. It then requires a kind of aggregation who services that are level, or third-party services who are focused on PaaS, who are going to be instrumental in providing those kind of infrastructure. And that infrastructure is very critical for a country like India to make it shift. And at this point, I should mention to you that if you look at the RBI having come out with its, I would say, new entity, umbrella entity, now the whole thing is all about moving from cash to digital. And it's all about saying, no, there is this entity which is going to provide you a kind of a service. Now you hook onto it and ride your innovations. So you're going to see that as a huge shift coming through very fast.
Okay. Uh, you talked about the So how is it like you're playing a role in the PaaS service, right? So what are your thoughts? What are your plans, and how
Sure.
do
Yeah.
you kind of bring this? Just to get a clear, definite perspective to the participants.
So let me put it this way, KK sir. Now look at it today. Today, we as FIS, we provide a lot of the payment as a service from a card perspective, right? Anything you want to do with a card, whether it's a acquiring touch point, whether it is e-com, whether you're doing it on the e-com, whether you're doing it on the ATM. No, there could be so many banks who are essentially driving the entire acquiring infrastructure. But for them to be able to aggregate it and send it to a common structure, which is essentially keep it very low, nimble, agile, and be compliant, is all what we provide as a service. So which means that the lead time to hook on, the lead time to make mandatory changes, the lead time to make sure that you are giving a changed and you're creating an experience in the front end, all that is possible only wherein you're on PaaS. Otherwise, your agility will be severely impacted, and we have already seen it. For example, when we had the pandemic, and for us, we say, you know what, we can do a frictionless cash withdrawal. That's possible. Now for us, if it was a entity, any entity running their own infrastructure, the amount of change and testing and cost and everything, here we could go across and say, you know what, we're going to be, we have the infrastructure, we're going to enable it. Whoever wants to subscribe to it, subscribe. It's become a more of a subscription approach, and then one enables and uses it. Now, this gives someone the flexibility to get on to new services. Now, that's one part when you're looking at card. Now, today we are talking of UPI, you're talking of IMPS, you're talking of real-time payments coming through now, you're talking of remittances. Now, what happens? Now, why will a bank start to build bespoke interfaces, integrations of so many environments? They would rather say, you know what, can you, as your company, can you build me a set of APIs or user interface, accessible interfaces that essentially that any of my partners, we or our partners, are able to just access them and fulfill the entire demand proposition that is there from a payment processing perspective, whether it is via an account to account, whether it is in cards, or whether it is using your IMPS transaction. So at the end of the day, an end user must say that, you know, my experience says I want to transfer X amount of money from A to B, period. What's the best mode of transfer is what is to be determined backend. And when that intelligence is starting to develop around the PaaS layer in terms of how they create that experience and enable that experience, why will an individual entity be ending up spending all of that again and again for themselves? They will only start to create more cost to their service. They'll create more time to market, and that's going to be detrimental because there's someone else who's going to be agile and move forward.
True, very true, absolutely. Thank you. That is a good explanation. So, ladies and gentlemen, I continue to have discussion with Mahesh on PaaS as a which is going to accelerate our payments. As usual, if you have any questions, please put in the question in the Q&A box. If you want to talk to him directly, you could do that also. You can ask, you can raise your hand, and the digital team will help you to get across your question directly to Mahesh. Uh, so, Mahesh, large banks, let's look at the banks, have already made sort of investments in enhancing their payment structure. Is PaaS as a model relevant for large banks? If yes, try to give us some examples.
Let's look at this whole thing. Large banks have always had the opportunity because of the fact that in the immediate past there have been so as look at us, you know, we both are playing in a space where we are operating as PaaS. When we go to a large bank, are we able to provide an assurance? More important, right? You're not able to provide them assurance, an assurance from a as I called about the risk assurance, the data assurance, as well as operational assurance and compliance assurance. When you look at these four pillars of assurance, I don't think as yet the value proposition has been clearly called out. Now look at it from a bank perspective. The bank says, you know what, me, it being in my own environment, I have control over it. I know what has to happen there, and hence, if my P&L supports it, I'm happy to spend money across in that. What it really starts to now change is banks have started to experiment with part of their ecosystem being outside. So what the best way to do is pilot it out. Now pilot out certain programs which essentially can be done on a PaaS model, right? A lot of now we're seeing emerging ecosystems around how we do prepaid programs. We're seeing emerging programs around how the variances of prepaid plus topped up with, say, certain loyalty programs and everything are starting to emerge. Now, I've seen large banks who essentially say, you know what, I have my infrastructure, I've just invested in the infrastructure. Maybe it's not a good time for me to just pick and take it out, but start doing my my adjacencies as they call it, and say, start with that. Let me test drive as to how successful it becomes. Let me test drive as how those kind of programs can create the agility. And once they are convinced that there is agility, there is lower cost of ownership lower cost per transaction, and there is also the right kind of security and compliance provided, they will start to think, they will start to say, you know what, do I continue to put money behind this infrastructure build out, or do I start to create certain, I would say, governance programs which essentially work around how one needs to manage the entire outsourcing game plan, and hence move to a PaaS. Uh, One can even look at consolidation across multiple banks and create its own entity. Maybe that's the next wave that will happen. But to see, will PaaS move into an environment like this? Yes, I would see. I don't think everyone is trying to put their own individual pieces of capabilities together. I think is just going to start creating cost lines to them, and coming out of it, when you're going to be challenged to show your profitability, challenged to show lower cost, to stay in business, you will have to start moving in to see the agility.
Mhm. Have you come across any large banks or even a medium scale bank, either in India or abroad, uh, trying to say, okay, let me adopt to this model?
So yes, I'm saying there is quite a few large organizations. I wouldn't like to name the bank, but there are
Yes, sir.
fairly bit of large, even large banks are today starting to create those programs which are outside. They have 4 or 5 different players who do it for them, and they run fairly decent sized programs outside. And this is run as a fully outsourced model for them in terms of a PaaS end to end. What the banks control very clearly, the banks will say, you know what, I have my mobile banking app, I have my internet transaction model. I'm going to be able to innovate in those front ends because that is what they should control from a customer experience perspective. So they will control
Mhm.
that aspect. And I think we should not get into the space. PaaS should not get into spaces where the business manages that the customer experience. Once you do that, you say, you know what, it is basic. It's very easy for me to now say, no, I keep changing my front ends, my new business models, and the back end takes care and delivers me on a click. Uh, and I get it. Now I use an API, I get it. I pay only for what I get. That's it.
Okay.
So yes, long answer, but the short answer is: are we seeing banks move into that? Absolutely yes, absolutely yes, man, without a doubt. People, it's all about how the player, the partner who comes along, is able to give that assurance, and the price benefits, the price benefit, cost benefits associated with it, and also see the value proposition. The end of the day, the value proposition makes a huge difference. If your value proposition is weak and saying, you know what, you can just come here and connect and complete your payments, maybe it doesn't work. Value proposition would be, can I add on to a risk management framework to it? Can I add a certain other loyalty framework to it? Can I start to add other forms of payments like a direct to account capability? So it's all about saying, how do you start stitching up the whole thing and providing a much more uh, deeper propositions that say, you know, it makes sense not to invest, but to take it on a service basis. That's when it really, and then you have pricing, which then becomes aligned to your That's how it, then it becomes a much more, I would say, workable model to beat the entire crowd.
Okay. Yeah. So to build the frills and whistles around the perhaps that will attract a lot of players. I have Devendra asking a question. He
Sure.
says the cloud market has rapidly expanded and dozens of new platforms exist. With contraction through acquisition or business failures, there is this chance, this is big risk looming across many of these institutions subscribing to this cloud market. I think that's the kind of question he's asking. He has not put it in so many words. Your thoughts on these?
So it's all about, so I have two questions. I have two views here. So one is, if I hear the question right, is will everyone survive in this market? The answer is no.
No.
For one has to be, when you go into a PaaS model kind of an approach, it's very important to evaluate the sustainability of that organization, and the more importantly, the ability of the organization to put its stakes on the ground in terms of that's the way forward as a strategy, and then willing to stay invested. That's very, very critical. There are, when you look at cloud, cloud adoption needs to also come with a lot more assurances, and the layer of assurance, as I've called out earlier, is very, very critical. So you can't just say that I'm hosted in an Amazon and an Azure and say thank you, Baba, that's it. That doesn't work. It's all about saying what is it that you bring as a service layer on top to be able to make sure that you presenting the um, right, I would say, right viewpoints to anyone who's subscribing to it. So in my mind, what will happen is there are a lot of players who will be niche, who will start to eventually start consolidating or fade away. But some of the large players will start to look at a payment as a service, large aggregation units, and they will be essentially starting to consolidate and drive the market away forward.
Okay, yeah, true. Another query I have is that does the vendor make it easy to take the applications and the data out of the platform if an institution wants to move away from a PaaS model?
Yeah, means why not? Seems the reverse migration also happens. Absolutely. No, so at the end of the day, who owns the data? The data is owned by the institution who's moving to PaaS, right?
Yes.
The service provider is at the end of the day only providing, it's the word, it's very clear, service provider. So clearly a reverse migration is absolutely possible. It has to be feasible, and it has to be done the most agile way. So you can't say that, no, I want to move back and sorry, it's not possible. That's not true. So these are some of the governance constructs that need to be in play, and the contractual constructs that need to be in play when one looks at moving to a PaaS. How can things don't work out, do I bring back? And what are the ease of bringing it back? Very, very important for us to understand.
Yeah, I think data is key. And what happens if there is an international cloud? Like, uh, you know, do we kind of figure out where the data is sitting for a country?
Well,
That's
see,
just
a
my
lot
thought.
of the international players have their own, I would say, interlocks with the compliance and regulatories, right? So they
Yeah.
ensure that as long as they are compliant as an end customer of the service of that data service, and if they are getting the right compliances for them to set up that infrastructure and it comes in, it should not matter where it is. So they will have multiple centers, they will have multiple replication centers. I think we should trust them into doing it. As long as you're convinced that the approach being taken is indeed fine and doesn't violate any of the regulatory asks, then it should be good to go.
Okay. Okay, let's see who else. We had two good questions coming from the audience, and equally good answers from Mahesh. Participants, I look forward to more of your questions. So do while Harish Prabhu, our very regular listener. He wants to ask you, Mahesh.
Yeah,
Mahesh,
Hello.
yeah,
Can
Harish.
go
can you?
ahead.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So can one, I mean, my question is, can one hypothetically run an entire bank on the basis of banking as a service? Now, and as a subset, is a payment as a service, right? I mean, the difference between both, if I understand, is that the core banking system, right, remains with the bank on-prem, and the payment as a service is outsourced, right, to a player or a set of players on a SaaS stroke PaaS model. Now, such kind of a thing, it's possible, you just mentioned, but what are the sizes of banks that, one could actually look at, whether it can be large PSBs or, going down to SFBs, payment banks, cooperative banks. More importantly, given that RBI, has been, what you call, in the past, they said that obviously the core banking should be on-prem and core banking cannot be outsourced or something like that, right? Or I don't know whether
No,
that's
nothing like that.
okay. And what? Yeah,
So the way I look at it, Harish, is
so the
yeah.
same question is, what kind of governance framework is required for this model? Because of this, GDPR and blah blah blah. So that's my question.
So let me answer it in two parts. One, is there a possibility for any bank to completely run its technology for banking on a service model? Yes, I can tell you, because I myself am running it, and not for one but for 8 banks. So it's absolutely possible to run entire banking on a SaaS model, which is whether banking as a service or payment as a service. It's absolutely possible. Uh, what are the and hence can it facilitate scale? Absolutely, it can facilitate scale, and it is absolutely possible for one to be able to state that I'm completely in a shared model or in a semi-shared model to be able to make it happen. So I don't see an issue there. I think what's important is your point to part two of the question of the ask that you had. When you are running it in a bit of a hosted model, what is important as an organization? As an organization, I would say that we will, how does the data, how does the data, how does the product that a business wants to make sure it works is accessible to them, and that the control continues to be with the entity, the banking entity, on a need basis, right? Or do so, which means that when any of the audit or any of the transactions, whatever happens, how does the entity who is outsourced essentially have the entire control associated with it? So which means that when the governance comes in, and that's where you rightly said the governance aspect of it, the governance aspect does not only talk about how one can be blind to what's happening in the background. It can't be that. So it has to say, hey, you tell me what is your data management strategy. You tell me what's your backup strategy. You tell me how's your recovery happens. You tell me how the data essentially is moving into a hosted framework, right? And within that host, how is the data security getting managed? How is the compliance related to that? How is those getting managed? How is your PCI? So there are 20, 40 questions that may come about, and we know we do it for a living. So it's very important for the organization which is outsourcing to be able to get into that kind of a very strong interlock contractually secured governance framework. That's very key. Because when the RBI or any kind of an audit happens, what do they look at it? Okay, fine, you've offloaded work to someone. How much are you in control of that particular, which is your own data? How much are you in control of? It doesn't mean you need to have a physical access and make it work. You need to know how your data is moving, what's happening. All that is supposed to be as a part of your governance. So governance view. So my belief and my clear understanding is RBI does not define what you do, how you do it. RBI defines as to how do you control it. and how do you have the right governance to your managing your outsourced vendor, and that's critical, whether it is banking as a service or whether it is payments as a service. I think and that's what they will look at. When you look at the partner who's providing the service, I think it is a partner's responsibility also to be able to ensure that the entity who's outsourcing to them, there is adequate levels of transparency and accessibility that is provided. When you marry these two, is when you make a fair bit of success. Because if you don't, you're going to have lack of trust issues, deficits. I would call it trust deficits coming in, and those trust deficits will start to degrade your entire engagement. I think that it's a two-way street. It is not a one-way street. And when both the parties come together and say, this is how we're going to operate, this is the interest of the overall compliance, transparencies, and the way we are going to be delivering the service, I think it's a great model to work. There are some elements of it which are evolving, but I would say largely, Harish, it is already there in play, and it is the way forward.
Sure. And this is irrespective of the size and category of the bank, right?
How does it matter? It can be done. Today also, you see if you see some of the large banks, Harish, now without naming, it is outsourced, right? The only comfort they have, it is within that data center. It is outsourced at their centers. Is it managed by their own staff? No, right? There's still a bunch of folks who come from a third party to deliver it to them at the data center. The only I would say the caveat to it is, it is in my data center. No one can flick a data out from here to there. That's fine. But otherwise, it's still managed by a lot of third parties to support them, because no single institution can build the entire domain and capability to manage an end-to-end infrastructure, application, security, all those layers put together.
No, thanks. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mahesh. Excellent question, Harish.
Okay.
So as per experts, Mahesh, adoption of a PaaS model is fast in the market, where there is a rush of investment into payments infrastructure for constant evolution. What is your view on the potential of PaaS model, particularly in the Indian market?
Like I've always said, when we as a FIS stepped back and looked at the opportunity, we have always been very gung-ho about it. We have always stated that payments as a service opportunity in India over the next 5 years, if we really put our heads together, we can grow our business to $1 billion easily. That's the kind of a market that, if you look at that TAM of the market, it's much more. It will be in the region of $10 to $11 billion that will come in. Because eventually everything will be dependent upon how the payment rails are created and how the payment rails enable you to drive faster adoption and agility and the transparency of the data being processed. Now, if you ask me, is there a growth path? The answer is absolutely yes. Is there an ability to adopt? I think there are some areas where, with the government backing and the players who are there in the space, have to be, I would say, come together with an open mind and say, this is how we're going to make that transformation happen. And one has to be paid for it, and there has to be a right pricing for it, but drive innovation. And when these two come together, you're going to have a much more better viewpoint. That's the way I look at it, KK sir.
Okay. So you feel that in the Indian market, it is really catching up?
Absolutely, it is catching up. With the emergence of fintech, I could say that the emergence of fintechs, adoption of those experiences by the larger banks, and with players coming into that space, these are all absolute, I would say, drivers for an increased adoption of PaaS. And more importantly, let me tell you one thing: when you get to do PaaS, when you get into
yeah.
No, go ahead, sir.
No, you go ahead.
So I would say also what's important is
one
as
important,
this will
yeah,
this will also define the economies of scale. Now, as you start to create more and more,
yeah,
the cost per transaction will come down, the cost per accessibility will come down. And who does it benefit? It benefits the institution which has moved into PaaS. Who does it end customer will benefit because he or she is able to get good, better experiences because the money saved here probably could be put into creating better experiences for the customer.
yeah, that's true. So any of these kind of moment it gets outsourced, the first and foremost question that comes to the institution's management mind is the risk that they're having. It depends on fraud risk, fraud prevention, and risk management. How does this happen? For how are payment service providers gearing up to take on this challenge?
Well, I think people are learning it a bit of, there is a learning curve there. I can only talk about where we're doing it from an FIS perspective.
Yeah.
We create what we call it as FIS Assure. We just say it's FIS Assure. FIS Assure means it gives you 4 pillars of assurance from a data perspective, from an operational and compliance effectiveness perspective, from your risk management perspective, from a data risk management perspective. And so when you create those assurances layers and you provide them as key tenets of your outsourcing,
Yeah.
and you demonstrate it, very importantly, you demonstrate it. Uh, I think your half a battle is won there. I think 3/4 of a battle is won. That's the way I
Yeah.
put it. And I think it's all about saying that when you create that win-win scenario, and I always say the initial first 5 to 6 months are very critical from gaining that trust. The next 18 months is ensuring that trust is only strengthened. In this game plan, in this time span, if you end up having issues, it is what is going to cause you the trust deficit. And that's what starts to derail a lot of the confidence that comes in.
Okay. One important aspect of any of this PaaS or SaaS is the contractual obligation for a service provider. And here we're talking of payment service provider. Uh, what are the key SLAs that the institution should definitely look at?
Well, see, I would put it as 2, 3 areas. When you run a PaaS environment, it is all about availability. It is about when you talk of availability is 24/7, the infrastructure and the capabilities available, services available. 2 is the ability of the environment to scale up to demand, on demand scale, which means that at no point in time, any transaction should take more than X seconds to be responded in and out. The third part is about saying how compliant you are, right? SLAs. Compliance to industry, compliance to regulations, industry, local regulations is very critical. And one can define the boundary of compliances. I wouldn't say it can be open-ended. It should not be open-ended. A lot of the times you end up creating open-ended compliance that costs and doesn't make it work properly. But you can have a shared cost, which allows you to get that scale. So in my opinion, if you look at it, it's all about the 4 or 5 key SLAs and KPIs. I would call it more KPIs and the underpinning SLAs supporting those KPIs. That's the way I would call it. So for example, let's take a case in point. No,
So I have
yeah, I have a very interesting see. There should be no loss of data. Very important at the end of the day, right? At the end of the day, if you are able to move to a no loss of information data, especially those data which is committed, I think good, great, because you are at the end of the day making sure you're not losing out on customer data and the customer experience, and hence the overall bank's confidence on that individual organization. So to me, data available, the the sanctity of the data, the availability of the environment, the compliance of the infrastructure, the ability to provide sustainable operations, and more importantly, is in terms of saying what is the kind of incremental innovations that you bring to the table as a part of your ongoing work is what is going to define as key KPIs.
So on similar lines, there is a query that has come to you, Mahesh. It says that when institution outsource its processing capabilities, that institution in turn outsources it to somebody else. Okay, and is that a good thing to do, or are you at a risk? He says, aren't we at a risk when such thing happens?
The way I look at it is slightly different. The way I look at it is, this is where, to Harish's point about governance comes in, right? It's about saying that when you create this kind of outsourcing approach, a PaaS approach, it means to understand, it needs to be understand contractually and from a proper obligation perspective, what are your roles and responsibilities and how do you want to execute it? Very important, right? You cannot keep outsourcing. That outsourcing chain has to have some limits, or it has to have back-to-back capabilities with the clear visibility for the person who is essentially starting the chain for outsourcing. That has to be there. So you can't do outsource to an outsource without having very differentiated viewpoints and then causing bridge, which is not reachable at all. So that's that can create a lot of problem statements. So we have to be careful. I don't have anything against it.
I think the
I'm not against it. I'm not against it, but I just want to make sure that as a part of contractual and governance views both, there is adequate, I would say, in terms of line entries that ensure that it is all measured and it is all factually clearly called out as how the organizations which undertake such exercises manage them. That's very important.
So I think the query of essence of the query that he's asking is that the institution is put under risk. So should the critical operations, can we say that it cannot be outsourced, or if it has to be outsourced, it has to be under their approval? Something of that sort can be brought.
Yeah, which happens, which is all a part of the contract. So one says that, for example, one may say that I want entry-level operators in their own environment operating in its own its boundary conditions, then it is different. But one says, you know what, I'm not going to, if you are outsourcing to a third party to do certain requirement gathering, then it may be risky. How do you do it? Because my sensitive business information may just flow out. So those areas are something which essentially, I think those things are emerging, and then we have to be careful there. Those are the areas I would be very, I would say concerned when if I were to be the other side, and I would like to contractually sort of create those lock-ins to make it happen.
Okay. So at this point, let me take a question coming to you from Tyagarajan. Tyag, can you please unmute and ask?
Hi, Mahesh. Such a wealth of information on PaaS, being a subject matter expert and also providing services to banks and a PaaS service. We have a real idea of what is a PaaS service is all about. My question is, to cut short, the payments business is all about let's say scale and volume, robust infrastructure, customer data protection, and grievance redressal. Now, to sum it up, what is your take? What is your takeaways of providing PaaS services to customers? What is that your guest? You can give it in a nutshell.
If you ask me that, it is here to stay. It is here to. It is only for. It is here to stay. It is about how the PaaS capabilities show itself up from an opportunity to, from a scale, from a security, and from a compliance and agility perspective, if some of these areas are effectively managed or well delivered by the entity who's delivering the PaaS, I would say it is only going to only grow. I don't see any reason why it will fall off the cliff. It won't. I don't think so. That's the way forward is PaaS, and I'm pretty convinced about it. Not just in India market, but across.
Thanks, Mahesh.
Okay.
Thanks, Dev. Yeah. So there is no doubt that this is a rapid development, Ramesh. So what are the hurdles in the rapid adoption of payment as a service? What is your recommendation to increase the adoption of payment as a service? If there are people from various institutions, what would you advise them to adopt this model?
I think it is no, I would probably take some bits of what Harish was asking for, but also add some more. I would say that there are multiple aspects to it. Is when a regulator is there, the expectation from a regulator in terms of expectations from an outsourced a PaaS entity is where it has to be fairly clear, right? Otherwise, it's up for all these interpretations. It has to be fairly clear. I'm not saying absolutely clear, fairly clear. Two is the approach to governing the entire PaaS operations from the entity which is outsourcing which is moving to a PaaS has to be very, very clear. They need to be knowing what business value it brings to the table. Coming on to the other side, which is essentially the PaaS service providers, they need to ensure that they provide the assurance, they provide the agility. I have repeatedly said agility, because it is only these two and the value proposition by virtue of price, which really allows them for sustainable operations. That these are going to be very clear for anyone to buy into it and say, you know what, if I go to X and I hook on, means it hooked on. And if I have an issue, there is a right level of communication, there is a right level of organization interlock to make things work. I think that's very critical. So I have both sides of the story that makes the difference, KK sir.
Last question to you is on the what's called as a portable PaaS. I have no idea about this. So he says, is it possible to have portable PaaS, that is to switch between public to private cloud easily and from cloud to private easily?
Well, I would say that it is, if one is moving to a public from private to public, why will someone come back unless and until there has been some challenge associated with moving to public? Now, one doesn't move to public unless and until one is absolutely sure that he or she meets all the criteria required. The organization meets all the required criteria. So I don't see that as I would say there is a possibility, but yeah, I mean, so one moving backwards from public to private is possibly rare as one takes a step in the front side. But yes, what's important is to make sure that you have the right level of engagement with the public cloud service providers to make sure that you don't get shortchanged. So you just have to be very clear about it. But there could be one or the percentage of move back from public to private will be lower, but percentage moving from private to public over the next couple of years are going to be higher. That's the way I put it.
Yeah, I guess. But I like the terminology he used, portable PaaS. Okay, that's a new terminology that's come at least to me. Heard about PaaS as, but portable PaaS is something new. Okay, I think we've come to the end of our discussion, and it's past the four mark. And so, my ladies and gentlemen, we have had a good discussion on PaaS. I think institutions which are looking at PaaS should look at, I think from what Mahesh said, I just summarized it for you: cost of ownership, accessibility, 24/7 on-demand scale, your quick transaction processing speed is very important, and have SLAs to that, and they should comply with regulations. No data loss, sustainable operations. I think these are some of the key points that Mahesh has touched upon, which institutions should look at and make PaaS perhaps will be a very cost-effective and a quick to adopt model than having things to be done on your own. So I think these are good thoughts, and as he said, there is a huge opportunity out there in PaaS in various sectors, including the MSC sectors. So I think these are something we need to look at. Mahesh, thank you very much for spending time with us on PaaS. I think there's definitely there is a lot of scope out there, and I think your thoughts are going to make it many of the institutions or participants will start thinking on this lines. Once again,
Great.
but ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking Mahesh for coming over and spending his valuable time with us.
Thank you. Much
Thanks.
appreciated. Thanks for the opportunity. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Participants, tomorrow we are having a special session with Mr. Vineet Rai, founder of FIS Group, one of the India's key VC group. The topic is VC, that is venture capital, decision making in the new normal. We also thank you for making what Business Banking Dialogue is today. Kindly subscribe to our YouTube channel, Electronic Payment and Services Private Limited, to watch all previous videos and get notification in future. Thank you again for watching BBD. Have a great evening. Bye-bye. Take care.